think everything's about supply and demand, and there aren't too many gringos living in Brazil. Where if you go to a place that's overcrowded with gringos, you'll be less of a novelty. So people won't be as interested in you, and I think that reflects in the dating pool. As a boyfriend, you're definitely expected to always be hugging and kissing and showing physical affection. And if you don't, it's like, why do you hate me? I'm like, no, it's just I didn't know we had to hug right now, but like that's kind of an expectation. Sometimes they have this fatalist attitude where like everything's bad, like nothing's gonna go right. But at the same time, they have like this other attitude where, oh, vai dar certo, a gente vai achar um jeito. We're gonna find a way to make it happen. So it's kind of strange how they balance those two kind of fatalist, everything's bad attitude and, oh, it's bad, but we're gonna make it work.
Hello and welcome to another Dating Beyond Borders podcast. Today, my guest is Tim, a popular American content creator from New Jersey who's been living in Brazil for 3 years. We'll talk about what it's like being the eternal gringo, how living in Brazil has changed his life, and his perspective on Brazilian relationships now that he's married to a Brazilian woman. So, Tim, thanks for joining me.
Thank you so much for the invite. I really love your podcast. It's interesting to see these cultural differences.
Thank you. Thank you for the introduction as well. So, Tim, I'm going to dive right into it. Let's talk about what it's like being a gringo in Brazil. You'd mentioned that this is a feeling that kind of doesn't go away for you, right? 3 years later, I mean, you've also backpacked Brazil, you told me.
Yeah.
So you've been in Brazil for a total amount of how long?
Yeah, like I would say that I started coming to Brazil. Well, I started coming to Brazil in February 2017, and then I had like hung out with Brazilians in New York City since like 2010. So I have a long track record with Brazilians, but living like officially with an apartment in Brazil about 3 years. But yeah, you're always going to be the gringo. It's something that doesn't change. It has a lot of positives because I think Brazilians really are welcoming to foreigners. I'm sure you've talked about this before in your podcast, but Brazilians really are interested in foreign cultures, and they love to show gringos Brazilian cultures, and they love when gringos comment on Brazilian culture. So that's something that really has helped me make friends and also really helped my channel. And so you're always going to be the gringo, even if you spent a lot of time and you feel like you speak Portuguese well and you know a lot about Brazilian culture. You're still the gringo. So it has its pros and I wouldn't say cons, but some challenges, I guess, when you want to be accepted as a local.
Yeah, you had mentioned to me over the call that we had that you also get kind of treated as the all-American guy. Like basically any questions that they have about the US, like the election, like Tim, you're that American guy that represents all of the US.
Yeah, they want to know my opinion on the election. If anything in the news is related to the United States, I have to know about it, and I'm expected to have an opinion, a formalized opinion. And also, people want to. I've been living in Brazil for a while now, so people will show me some Brazilian food that's pretty common at this point for me. Like, oh, here's the pão de queijo, which is pretty much in every bakery. And like, have you ever tried pão de queijo? And I don't want to be rude. I'm like, oh yeah, I've tried it a few times, but sure, I would love to try it again. So you always have to kind of be the spokesman for the United States. It's sometimes a lot of pressure, but it also opens a lot of doors. You're always invited to parties and barbecues and on TV shows. I've been on like the late night show here, and I think if I was just a Brazilian YouTuber with similar numbers, I don't know if they would have invited me. So they definitely want to hear a gringo's perspective on things.
Has it been easier for you in terms of dating when you had just arrived? Obviously, you were single. You didn't meet your now wife back then. Do you feel like Brazilian women treat gringos differently? Is there more maybe like a sense that, oh, he's a gringo, I can trust him more than a Brazilian, or he's so blonde, or whatever the case may be?
I don't know about trusting more. I would say that people are interested in cultures that there's not too many. I think everything's about supply and demand, and there aren't too many gringos living in Brazil. Where if you go to a place that's kind of overcrowded with gringos, you'll be less of a novelty. So people won't be as interested in you, and I think that reflects in the dating pool. So I think if you're someone new, if you don't look too similar to the local people, and people are open to foreigners, you're definitely probably gonna at least get more interest from local people. So I would say that definitely opens some doors. But I think if the market got saturated and if there were a million gringos in Brazil, I think that would change pretty fast. But still relatively rare to see a gringo day to day. It's not like Western Europe where kind of America. That's like Americans. They go to Paris, they go to Rome. I guess London probably. I haven't really been to London, but those are like cities that are full of Americans. So you're really not that special. But in Brazil, you're still pretty special. You're still kind of a rarity. Maybe less so in Rio. If you're ever into like Zona Sul, the south zone of Rio, they're pretty used to gringo. Oh, and there you might, oh, there another gringo. But even in Sao Paulo, which is a very multicultural city, there's not too many Americans running around. Maybe some people work here. They're working for a multinational company, but you don't get too many American tourists compared to the size of the city. So yeah, definitely, you're definitely a novelty, and yeah, if you have kind of features that aren't common in the place, you definitely you can use that to your advantage for sure.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think it's that exotic factor. It's like, if you're used to seeing just blonde people, then you see like a beautiful Brazilian girl, you'd be like, wow, or just a Brazilian woman, like if you go to Sweden and there's a kind of a Latina there, right? That people are going to fawn all over that woman or man because it's just so different. Like I had a conversation, I have a couple, they're basically, she's Italian, he's Venezuelan. And he said they lived in Scotland, and back in Scotland, he was considered the Venezuelan guy, the Latino, even though the guy can't even dance. But he was just like pulling out all the moves, and people are looking at him like, wow, you're so Latin American. And he's just like, literally, if I went back to Venezuela, I'm considered an introvert. But just because I'm in Scotland, where this is a novelty, it's that exotic factor where you get labeled as that, oh, he's an American guy, even because there's not a lot of Americans in Brazil, as you said, especially like in zones that are not too touristy, like Rio. But the other thing that's really interesting is that I find that Brazilians are still very open to dating other cultures. Like I remember going to Argentina and just kind of seeing that Argentinians, for example, they prefer to date their own people. We asked this question: would you rather date a local or foreigner? Argentinians are more likely to say a local, whereas Brazilians, I feel like they love different cultures. And so maybe that's another factor where they're quite open to dating people from all over the world, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it has to do with Hollywood a little bit. Brazilians really feel like they know the United States and they're exposed to the culture from the United States. Every third movie takes place in New York City. It's the dream of a lot of Brazilians to go to Disneyland. Argentina, I don't know if it's the same level. Also, they have some monetary problems. Well, I don't know how Disneyland is an option for a lot of Argentinians right now. So, but yeah, I've been to Argentina, and they definitely Argentinians are a little bit tougher to crack, but they're once you get into a conversation with an Argentine person, they're pretty funny and pretty outgoing, but they're a little bit less likely to invite you into their circle of friends. So you kind of have to find your way into a circle of friends. Where Brazilians are much more open in general to accept foreigners, whether it's friendships or dating. So yeah, I've definitely seen a lot of couples, gringos and and Brazilians. Definitely, probably more women to men, but I also know a lot of Brazilian men that date American women. But definitely, if I was doing ratio, it'd be more common to find a Brazilian woman dating an American man. And also, like when you think about the fact that you know so many Brazilians dating compared to other countries, I think a lot of people underestimate the size of Brazil. Like, Brazil has 220 million people compared to Argentina, which has maybe 45, 50 million. So there really are a lot of Brazilians. And whenever you travel, you're guaranteed to have a few Brazilians in the city. So you can always and there's always like little groups of Brazilians on Facebook or something. So it's really easy to make friends. It's kind of like a universal support group where you can always find a Brazilian to have a beer with, or if the climate allows, have a barbecue. So it's definitely a big open culture. They're outgoing, which I mean, obviously, one thing I learned here, there are a lot of introverts in Brazil. You just have this stereotype that all Brazilians are outgoing, but it's definitely a stereotype that's based on facts, where at least the majority of the population, if they're not outgoing, they at least know how to behave in that manner. So you're definitely going to be able to make friends, be able to have conversations. Brazilians love to talk too. Like there'll be a circle of Brazilians and everyone's talking, and there could be like three or four different conversations going on in the same circle. Where I think in the United States, if there's five people, it's one person talking, four people listening. Where Brazil could be like two people talking, having split conversations. So they're definitely a very communicative culture.
Yeah, but a great point that, we do have this stereotype of Brazilians just samba, soccer, very outgoing, very sociable. And I think to an extent it's true, right? But at the same time, you're right. There are so many introverted Brazilians. I mean, I'm dating one very introverted compared to like a regular, typical Brazilian, the stereotype. I have a friend who's dating a Brazilian who's also quite a nerdy, a very introverted Brazilian guy. So there are definitely those people as well. I know quite a few. But I still think so. My assistant, she's Brazilian and she just now moved to Sweden. And she says, like, in Brazil, I am an introvert. I don't like to leave my house. I don't like to socialize. But she said, I know in Sweden, I'll still be the loudest person in the room because, they look at her and they say, oh, you're Brazilian. You're so outgoing. She's like, not really, not in Brazil. But I guess, it's all relative, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like, it depends on where you are.
Think it's a scale. So like Brazilians will say Americans are kind of closed, where don't think Americans are closed. I think they might be kind of closed when you compare them to Brazilians. They might be a little cold compared to Brazilians, but I don't think they're cold compared to the general population of the global population. So I think it's all relative in that case. Where I think then British people would be kind of comparatively colder than Americans, not like every British person, but if you're doing like the scale, that's just kind of some things I've noticed. I could be wrong, but that's how I feel in terms of the culture openness scale.
No, and I completely agree with you. I mean, if you ask Europeans about Americans, they'll usually say they're too open for my
Hmm.
liking. They're too
They're
friendly.
loud.
They're loud. They're loud is a stereotype, right? But then compare that to Brazilians, and you're British in comparison to Brazilians, right? So it's all really on a spectrum. Okay, let's talk about the dating scene and specifically your experience and your now wife. I mean, how did you guys meet? What was that story like?
So I had been doing YouTube for a while, and actually, she didn't follow me. At least she said. I don't know. She said she didn't follow me, but her mother followed me. And it's funny because a lot of mothers, like, I don't know what it is about my content, but a lot of mothers like my content. And she followed me. She was learning English, and I finally made a video about Christmas in Brazil and kind of compared it to the United States. And she saw that video and she sent me a message, and we started talking. And then eventually, I asked her on a date, and it was like 4 years ago, and we've been together since. It's been great, and we got married in Rome in September. It's like 3 months ago now. So it was my first Brazilian relationship. Actually, even though I'd spent a lot of time in Brazil, that was my first long-term Brazilian relationship.
Wow, congratulations. Hey, everyone, just a quick note to say that while I love putting these podcasts together each week, they do take a ton of time and effort. So if you're enjoying the show, please make sure to follow on YouTube, Spotify, wherever you're tuning in, and give this podcast a 5-star rating to help it grow. This support really helps me keep improving the show's quality. Thank you, and back to the episode. Tell me, were there any culture shocks, or I don't even want to say culture shocks because obviously there were no shocks, but any cultural differences that you've experienced throughout the relationship?
I think I was a pretty like well-trained gringo at this point, where I'd been living in Brazil for a while. So I don't think it's a little hard to shock me at this point. But I would say that one thing, Brazilians are a little bit more family oriented than in other cultures. So you're going to spend a lot of time with the family, and there's a lot of family events. And a lot of times people think, oh, so Americans don't care about their family, which isn't true. I think there's just a little bit less um, expectations of time and events that you have to spend with your family. And a lot of people live at home for longer in Brazil, and it's much more common. And it's even pretty common for women to live at home until they get married here, even in kind of more progressive places. So it's that's a little bit different. They have like a saying, if you live together, you're married, essentially, in Brazil, which is not the case in other countries. So those would be some things I've noticed. I don't know if I'd go as far as saying culture shocks, because I've I've had, maybe it's more shocks for like my parents, who are monolingual and don't know anything, and then they see all these Brazilians talking and having fun. But I also come from a big Irish family that likes to party, so I wouldn't say I personally have had any really big shocks, but I definitely could imagine there being some culture shocks for people that aren't used to Brazil. And my wife she's visited the United States. She speaks English really well, so there's no problem on that end. I think that's really important. I never thought about that before. I would think, oh, I don't care if the person speaks English or not, but it's definitely something that makes a big difference when you're introducing them to your family, and you don't have to babysit. They're autonomous. They can make friends. Like I was at my cousin's wedding, and yeah, she was making more friends than me. She was actually dating. She was dancing with the aunt of the groom, who's not even part of my family. So that was like, she was just making random friends. So Brazilians are definitely social, and because she could speak English, that definitely helped definitely helps. And just not it's not just speaking English, it's having some cultural awareness and knowing what to do and what not to do, and being outgoing and being able to make friends. It's definitely important. And I would, if I was giving any advice, I don't know if this is my time to give advice, but it's important if the person doesn't speak the language that they at least show an interest in learning your language. I think it's an indicator of serious interest, long term interest, and it's going to make your life a lot easier down the road if you want to have mixed family time with both sides of the family, and you're not just an interpreter.
What about the stereotypes of Brazilian women being more tactile, affectionate, more vocal, more jealous? What do you think about those?
I would definitely say like there's just a general more people hug more here and kiss more here with their families. So as a boyfriend, you're definitely expected to always be hugging and kissing and showing physical affection. And if you don't, it's like, why do you hate me? I'm like, no, I'm just it's just I didn't know we had to hug right now. But like that's kind of an expectation in Brazil to always be showing physical affection and holding hands. And in the United States, it's probably a lot less. So I just had to make sure that I always understood the expectations at the time. So definitely that jealousy, I think it goes, for the person. But I think Brazilian culture is definitely a culture that likes to make sure they know what's going on in the person's life for sure. I think in general, I've generally observed that, and where there's a little bit less where people hang out with their males will go out hang out with their own friends in Brazil when they're dating than in the United States. Something I've noticed at a high level, but I wouldn't say that she's particularly jealous, and she's here listening to this conversation. So maybe you can interview her one day and ask her what she thinks about that.
Yeah, I always wonder about the jealousy. I wonder if, because, I think like in the US, but especially in different countries in Europe, let's say in Scandinavia, jealousy is considered toxic and
Hmm.
unnecessary. For a lot of cultures, however, my brother's with an Iranian girl, she kind of wants to be jealous. She'll push for jealousy. It feels like it's boring if there's no drama. And I
Yeah,
wonder how Brazilians are in that. I mean, it just so depends on the person, right?
I think if there was no jealousy or no like affection, then it would be like a sign like this person's really not interested in me. So it's all about level. Like it's another like thing on the spectrum. Like okay, a little bit of jealousy shows love. Like too much jealousy is probably going to be problematic. So you have to make sure you find the right level. And this is I mean I know it's stereotypical, but Brazilians grew up on like novellas. They're not as popular anymore, but still like that those kind of things I think seeped into the culture. So there's definitely a little bit more kind of flair and dramaticness in Brazil compared to the United States. And I think all Latin countries are pretty much like that. At least like Colombia, Venezuela, Brazil, maybe Argentina is a pretty dramatic country in my experience too. I don't know about like the because I know there's a difference in between the Andean countries where they're a little bit colder, like Peru and Bolivia. They're a little bit more reserved, but Brazilians are very outgoing, very fiery in general. So, which is nice too. I think a lot of people like that. They come here and they kind of get some spice in their life, a little bit more action and energy, and it's there's never a boring day for sure.
Yeah. From, having spoken to Brazilian women, have you kind of discovered something about what they think about dating Brazilian men? I know in Rio there's a stereotype, the cariocas, but they're considered more sexual than the other parts of Brazil, that men are kind of, oh, they're not trustworthy, or, this kind of stereotype. Have you discovered something that Brazilian women generally think about Brazilian men?
The stereotype that people believe that is definitely true. There's definitely and a lot of people say, "Oh, you can trust Americans more than Brazilians," but I've definitely seen the counter be true. So you have to be careful about Americans as well. I think it's more of a personal thing than a cultural thing. Some people will cheat. There's a little bit of maybe some like industries that would help cheating here. Like they have motels where you drive in and you hide your car, and the busiest hour for the motel is during lunchtime because that's during work hours. So that's something you wouldn't find in the United States. They have this style of music called música de corno. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. It's basically songs about people getting cheated on and like how like terrible that is. And I'm sure like Adele sings about that too. So it's not something specifically unique to Brazil, but it's definitely a style of music that's pretty popular here. I don't know. I'd have to go to the data to see if which country cheats more, but I don't know. I think it's at the end of the day, it's an individual choice to cheat, and we can't blame a culture. But it'll be interesting to see if there's any data that would support that.
Yeah, it is funny though, like from dating a Brazilian, like as I said, he's quite an introverted, genuinely like a very nice family oriented guy. But some of the things he says are so Brazilian, like we'll watch an Anita video and he'll be like, "Oh wow, you can't hide that butt."
Well,
That's just so, you know, and it's just it comes out of nowhere. I call it the Brazilian comes out of nowhere because generally he's not like that. But then when it comes to a woman looking sexy, like he'll say it. I said, I don't like it. Let's stop doing that. So he stopped. But it's just so for me, I feel like that's still such a if you have an introvert from any other country, like you're gonna get an introvert that's not gonna say that, right? But a Brazilian introvert, you still get a little bit of this thing.
but at least he's being open in front of you because there's a lot. I'm sure there's a lot of introverts in other countries that are doing much shadier things, and you just would never know about it. So at least he's he's being honest, and you had that conversation. Yeah, of course there's certain things. Oh, you talk to your partner, your wife. Oh, this is something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Can you stop doing it? And maybe you didn't know about it, and then you stop doing it. And I think that's about building a relationship. You come from different places, and you want to make sure that you're making the other person as happy and comfortable as possible. So there's certain things that I might not have been used to or she might not have been used to. And as long as you're willing to talk them through, I think that's the key. Communication, especially when there's a language barrier. This wouldn't be the case in our case, but when there's cultural language barriers, you have to make sure that you're making an effort for good communication. So what you say and what you do doesn't hurt the other person. That's how you ruin relationships when you can't communicate.
Exactly. And it's interesting because I did talk to my assistant about this. So she's from Rio and she says, I feel like in Brazil it's also quite common to comment on people's appearance to say, "Oh, this person's attractive, this person looks good." And she says, "I'm dating a Swedish guy and he just didn't like that, so I had to stop doing that." But I never thought it was something weird to do because I just feel like we do this so much. And again, I don't know if this goes for everyone. It's so hard to say because again, she's from a different state. Is it Rio? It's Rio state. I guess it
We have a
is.
state, yeah, state, a city and a
Um,
state.
yeah, but going back to the motel though, it's interesting though because you have these love motels in Latin America because a lot of people. This goes back to the family situation. Is that a lot of people, I guess, live with their parents as well, right? So I know Brazilians at one point or another they've experienced a motel situation because they just couldn't invite someone home, right? And for your now wife, I mean, did she live? How did it work for you guys? Did she live with her parents prior to you guys moving in together? And then is moving in together considered a really significant step for getting married in Brazil?
Actually, it's pretty common that you don't move in together until you get married. So, you can see each other. A lot of Brazilian cultures, you'd be sleeping in other beds when you're in the parents' house. So it's definitely they still. I don't know. It's not every family, but it's definitely still a conservative culture in that aspect. And usually, the expectation in a relatively conservative household would be you don't move in until you get married. So yeah, when we're in the United States, that's not so common. And usually in the United States, people want to have like a test drive to make sure that they can live with that person before they get married. Where in Brazil, it's usually not the case. Um, so yeah, I think does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, it does. And speaking of dating, I mean, Americans are renowned for dating around, right? This whole dating around until you have the talk and you determine that you're exclusive. Until then, you have all the freedom in the world to date as many people as you want. Um, I've always had a little bit of a beef with that situation because I just find it so if I like someone, how can I even have the energy to date a few people, right? But Americans, they're renowned for this situation, just kind of testing out the waters. But tell me whether or not you think it's true for yourself. And also, you've talked about the four stages of Brazilian relationships or dating process. Tell me a little bit about that as well.
Well, as it's been so long, I don't know if I'm familiar with all the steps, but as far as I can remember, you have to meet someone, and then you have there's a phase where but basically let's go back to the United States where you don't really have a specific question, are we dating? Usually it'll be this awkward conversation and someone will say, what are we? Are we serious? Are we exclusive? And that will be like the big romantic gesture, which is not that romantic. Where in Brazil, you kind of have to ask. If you don't ask, you're not dating. There's like a very specific rule about that. So I've seen people meet and then start dating in a month, and I've seen people meet and not ask to date for 2 years. So there's no exact time frame. I think it depends on what people's expectations are, sometimes how much they like the other person, which is definitely a big factor. But yeah, there's a contact chino phase, which would be like if we're comparing it to digital marketing, that's more like the leads phase where you don't know if this person's serious, and you might have a few or like 4 or 5 contact chinos depending on the person where you're talking to. It's not, I guess, not necessarily hooking up with. Then they would move into the ficante phase, which is a hookup. And there's possibilities you could have more than one hookup. Some people have one, some people have three, some people have 5. It really depends on the person. But then once you meet someone that you like, the expectation is to get rid of all those people and then ask the person, ¿Você quer namorar conmigo? Would you like to date? And once you ask that, I mean, I've seen cases where people use a dating ring. I never used a dating ring, but there are some people that will even use a dating ring. And then you're dating, and then you still have to ask to get married. The time frame depends on the person, but I've seen it happen pretty quick. I've seen people live together for 20 years and never actually have a wedding, but they consider themselves married, even if they never went to the courthouse, or here it's called like the notary, the cartorio. So that happens too. And then there's a lot of families where there's a couple kids from a couple different marriages. So there's no set rule. But I guess if you're going to do everything correctly, you would meet the person, you would get to know them, you would make sure you would stop talking to anyone else, you'd ask to date, and you'd be dating. And then in a year or two, if the person is the one, you'd ask them to marry you, and then you'd move in together.
Okay, and then for your now wife, did you go through any of these stages?
Yeah, we went through all the stages. I think I asked her to date after about a month and a half of us hanging out. I think we met in February, and by March maybe the beginning of April we were dating, and then we had dated for like 3 years, and I asked her to marry me, and then we got married. We had like a smaller wedding in Rome because we don't have any like I don't have any visa to stay here, so we wanted to have a wedding so we can get all the documents in order, and then maybe plan a bigger one in Brazil or in the United States, so we have some time to plan. But yeah, that was we did it for like 3.5 years. I think I knew her for about a month and a half before I asked her to date, because we just got along really well. And I don't know if there's a formula. I think sometimes you just have to go on intuition, and if it feels right, just do it. And that's kind of where we are right now, and we're married for about 3 months now. So everything's been really, really nice. I never really had any. I don't know. Some people dream about their future husband or wife, or dream about their marriage. I never had any of that growing up. I just wanted to play baseball and stuff. So, and it's all kind of things I never planned, but it's really been like it's been perfect. So no complaints.
When you say you asked to date her, does that mean that you said, I want to date you exclusively? Or was it just like, okay, let's call this thing. What is this? What are we doing?
In Portuguese, você quer namorar comigo? And we were in Paraty, which is a beach town in Rio. And we were a bunch of friends on a beach. My brother was there. I mean, that's not how you have to do it, but we were just having like a little party on the beach, and it just felt right. And I just asked her, and she said yes. And it was romantic. So now we always have Paraty, and then I asked her to marry me in Curitiba, which is another city in front of the botanical garden. And then we got married in Rome. So I don't know what the next city is that's gonna
very
be a part of
romantic.
our story. Yeah. So yeah,
That's very romantic.
I'm not
Yeah.
a natural romantic, but I'm trying my best.
No, and I don't think either. Like, there are some countries that are culturally known for men being over the top romantic, like with, let's say, Mexico. Mexican men go all out because they know women expect that. I don't think Brazilians have this fame for being, again, person to person, right? But there isn't a fame for Brazilian men being extra gentlemen or extra, like, I feel like it's fairly person to person, and I think it's also fairly casual the first dates a lot of times. Maybe I just talk to people in Rio, and it can depend. I'm not sure.
Rio is extremely casual, where maybe in like the interior it might be a little bit more formal, because people like to. Oh, there's like, if you go to Goiânia, it's a city it's in the interior of the country, and people like will wear heels every time they go out. So every time they go out, they're getting dressed up and wearing heels, and like the guys are wearing nice social long sleeve button downs. Where in Rio, people are generally pretty casual, and I think that reflects in other aspects of culture. So dating will be more casual. Maybe you'll go to the beach and meet someone at the beach. Like in Rio, everyone has their own like postos. Like they have like, there's like, I don't know, postos in the South Zone, and then there's different barracas, which are tents, which sell drinks and sometimes food. So you're like, oh, let's meet me at Barraca 22, and then you always that's kind of your spot. So Rio's very casual, I think. Sao Paulo is kind of in the middle. Sao Paulo is pretty cosmopolitan, so you can go for a really nice date, dinner, restaurant, or you could go to a boteco, which is a kind of a corner bar. So it depends on the person. So I think Sao Paulo has a lot of options where you could go gentleman, upscale, or you can kind of go laid back, low key. So it depends on the person. As far as gentlemen, I think it would depend on the person. I wouldn't say Brazilians are overly romantic in terms of maybe gestures, but they're definitely romantic in terms of words. Like they'll write these huge posts about how much they love this person. This could be for a dating, or it could be like your nephew. People really are open with the way they express words and how much they can. I think off the top of their head, they can write a text on how much they love this person, what the person means to them, and that'll be much more challenging for someone from the United States. So I think it's a little bit more cut off emotionally, not like completely, but compared to Brazilians, where they're a little bit less open to showing emotions. But I do hear from a lot of people that Americans tend to be gentlemen compared to some other cultures. Like they'll open the door, they'll pay for the food, no problem. That's something I've heard. I don't know if it's 100% true, but maybe that could
Yeah.
that could start a little conversation in the comment section.
Yeah, let us know what you guys think. I mean, obviously, talking about Americans is always such a everybody flocks to the comments. I think Americans, there is a sense in North America, I'm Canada, it's very similar nowadays that vulnerability is kind of dangerous. So
Hmm.
people are, because they're playing the field a lot of times, but they also don't want to be perceived as a loser or perceived
Hmm.
as weak. Like if I share too much about how I feel about this woman, she's going to say, well, I don't feel like that, or he showed me too much. I'm no longer interested. It's no longer a game. Like it's a bit of a power play.
Hmm.
And I feel like we're all missing a little bit of that, where people are just like genuinely honest and vulnerable and saying, like, I like you. I want to see you. I remember I went on a date with a Brazilian, and it was super funny because, like, typically, if you go on a date with an American or Canadian, they'll wait some time before they get back to you. But he like wrote me back the next morning or even after the date. I think it was like an hour after the date. And he said, like, oh my God, I had such a great time! Exclamation, exclamation,
Hmm.
exclamation. And it was just so different because he was just so genuinely, he didn't care about the fact that he was maybe too vulnerable with showing his interest for me, And I think here we hold our cards so close to our chest because we don't want to be hurt in a way. And so people are just like, no, I'll just play it cool. Like I won't be too complimentary. At the same time, I think you raised a great point. I think Americans are gentlemen. I don't think I can say the same about Canadians to that extent, but Americans still have, depending on the state, of course, US is so big, right? But people still have some old school values where you pick the girl up, you pay for the bill, you take her to a nice place, and women expect that. And I don't know how it is for Brazilians, but I do feel like probably if I had to generalize, I'd say Americans are more of a gentleman in that sense.
Yeah, if I'm just channeling the pros and cons I've heard about Americans from Brazilians, it would be that yeah, they're gentlemen, they're very polite, they're not too forward or aggressive, but and then sometimes they could go too far the other way where they're like, is this person even interested in me? They're not showing any affection, they're not showing any emotion, they're not taking the first move. So I think you if you're too far to the kind of reserved, you might miss your opportunity here because people are expecting some kind of affection and showing of affection. And back to your point about what you said about a lot of people try to play games here, not here like in the world. I would say this is universal now because people have read books and they think, oh, I have to game this person into liking me, and I think it's almost impossible to game someone into liking you. So I think it's much easier to be sincere. I think you're going to lose less chances being sincere and just responding right away than trying to game the situation. I would say like just one counterpoint is try to have an interesting life that's not just related to the person. If you have an interesting life, you're naturally going to be a little bit less available because you have friends, you have a job, you have all these things going for you, and then you don't have to fake it. A lot of people have nothing going on and they're trying to create this weird game, and the person just gets confused. I've definitely seen some people like Isabella has friends. I have my friends, and sometimes the things they do, I'm like, why would you do that? Why wouldn't you just? There's like an easy opportunity to just be sincere and just say, let's go, let's hang out, go on a date, and they just make it way more complicated than it needs to be, and they end up not going on a date or it not working out. So I think that's definitely a problem. I think people try to be too clever when they should just be sincere and honest. Not like you don't have to say all your feelings on the first date, but you know, just be move the process forward in the most practical way.
Yeah, I agree. I also think what you said about Brazilians, kind of if you're not showing that interest, Brazilian women, I think, can lose interest because if you've been on 2, 3 dates with her and you haven't even tried to make a move, a lot of women will say, well, he obviously just doesn't find me attractive, or, I see him now as a friend. And I think for a lot of introverted guys that come to Brazil, that might be maybe a little bit tricky because they're so used to that assertive approach from Brazilian men. I know a lot of Brazilian women that come to Canada because Canadian men, they don't approach, just like Americans, probably way worse, I think, actually. And women really complain here because they say, like, I gave him the look. I looked at him. He didn't do anything. Like, am I so ugly? What's going on? I've had this conversation with Brazilian women so much because they just don't know how to navigate that, where men don't make any move, don't approach. Again, I think nowadays, though, who approaches whom, right? Maybe even in Brazil, it's not as much of a thing anymore. But yeah, it's funny.
Yeah, I still think Brazilians are not afraid to approach. Where in the United States, depends on the city. Like if you go to New York, New York is a city where people are pretty aggressive. So if you're at a bar, like and if a girl's sitting by herself at a bar, like someone's probably going to talk to her. And like Rio is definitely like that. Where Rio, if you go to if you're with your date and you go to the bathroom, someone will probably be talking to them. Not to say everyone will be, but it's just you can generalize that someone will probably be talking to them. So it's definitely a place that approaches more. But the same thing with Brazil and the United States. They're so big where certain cities and cultures have a much more like outgoing and kind of aggressive way of dealing with people, and other places are much more reserved. Like if you go to a place in the South, in the United States, where life is very slow, 3 or 4 dates might be nothing. You're just getting to know the person. Where in New York, the pace is much faster. And same thing with Brazil. Some cities are much faster, and some cities are slower in that sense, getting to know people.
Okay, Tim, getting off of the dating wagon, let's talk about your personal experience in Brazil. I mean, genuinely speaking, obviously you've chosen Brazil because you love it, and maybe you've stayed because you didn't plan to stay, but you met a woman and then you fell in love and stuff like that. I mean, initially, was Brazil ever like the place you really wanted to live in, or did you just kind of stumble upon it?
I would say I kind of stumbled upon it, but I feel like something was calling me to it. I remember, I don't know if you're familiar with these like college book fairs. In the beginning of college, you have like a book fair and you can buy posters. And I remember my freshman year, I bought a poster of Cristo Redentor, like in a black and white, the Christ on the Rio mountain, Corcovado. And I bought it and put it in my room, and I didn't know a word of Portuguese, but I guess it was kind of just subliminally calling me to Brazil. So I don't know. And then I took a Portuguese class in college and a Portuguese film class. And then I went to a Brazilian World Cup game in Newark. One of the great things about living in New York, and Newark is the city in New Jersey, you just get access to so much culture. You can pick and choose whatever culture you want to hang out with. So I just kind of was adopted by the Brazilian expat community or immigrant community in New York and New Jersey. And I just made so many friends. And I guess I stumbled on it, or it chose me, and then I chose it. I'm not sure the sequence, but it was kind of random, but definitely just fell in love with the country and the culture and the people and the food. So and I think it's a pretty common experience for a lot of not that many gringos go to Brazil, but the gringos that do go to Brazil usually fall in love with it and become completely Brazilian.
Are there any struggles that you still have with living in Brazil? Is there something that you miss about the US or something that you just can't get quite used to?
I think that people in Brazil they're exposed to United States culture, but on like a superficial Marvel Disney level, where there's a lot of things that I want to talk about that it's a little harder. Even like things like American football. Like I don't have any friends here that watch American football, so every Sunday I turn on the TV and root for my team by myself. So, watching sports is like a communal experience. So some of these communal experiences that were so easy to have in the United States, and some conversations with your friends that have the same culture, same references, same inside jokes. I guess sometimes you miss that. So I don't have too many American friends down here, mostly Brazilians, and actually a lot of French friends randomly. But I guess that and my family, I definitely would like to see them more, but we try to see each other a couple times a year. I think just that culture, that those cultural things, and just some reference points that when you're inside of a culture, you can make certain jokes that you don't need to explain. A joke is ruined if you have to explain it. So there's sometimes I'll have something really funny to say in English, and I just know that for me to make that joke, I would have to explain the whole context for like 5 minutes. So I just avoid it. Things like that. Food, the Brazilian food is really good. I guess if there's anything I missed, it would be the New York delis. New York delis with like a pastrami and prosciutto and mozzarella and Italian bread, which are kind of harder to find here. But São Paulo is one of the few cities in Brazil where you can almost find any type of food. So the food is really good in São Paulo.
Do you feel like Brazilians have a thing for sugar? Because I just feel like, in general, not just Brazilians, I want to say like Argentinians, for example, it seems like people really gravitate towards Pepsi and like sugar additives.
I would say yes, and probably because it's one of the bigger sugarcane producers. It's what like, if you study the history, they have like different economic cycles, and one of their big cycles was sugarcane. And if you go to certain places, you just see fields and fields of sugarcane. So it's probably cheaper here. And even they use like a lot of the cars use ethanol gas, which just burns sugarcane. So definitely, I think that's one of the reasons. And then they have a few desserts that kind of go with every meal. I don't have a big sweet tooth, but my wife, like every time we have a meal afterwards, she's like, let's make brigadeiro, which it's kind of a process. It's not hard, but it's not super easy. It takes like 15 minutes. I would just be like, okay, that's good for now. But she always makes a brigadeiro. So I think that people have a sweet tooth. And if you like caipirinha, I would invite. It's like almost like sausage. You don't want to see it being made because they just put tons and tons of sugar in there. And you're like, did I just really drink all that sugar? But yeah, so definitely a sweet tooth, and I think it's because they have the sugar producing country, and it kind of found its way into a lot of foods and drinks.
Speaking of food, I kind of have a funny story. When I was on the second date with my now boyfriend, like I said, I really love making pão de queijo.
Oh yeah,
He just went,
yeah.
yeah, you probably
That's
shouldn't say
yeah.
that.
Yeah, that's a classic. That's a classic gringo joke. We can't get the own. That's a difficult sound. Pow and bone. So those are and
There's a
pow, which just
difference.
means stick, can mean many different things depending on the context. And if people want to use their imagination, let them use it. But yeah, that's a classic gringo joke. They always try to say, hey, like what do you say this gringo? What is this called gringo? And then you're like, oh, pau de queijo. Oh, is that pau de queijo? Oh my god. Yeah.
That's so funny. But as a side question, actually, because you're such a big creator in Brazil, I mean, do you get approached often? And are they like, oh my God, it's Tim. Let me talk to you. Let me ask you a million questions.
Yeah, I get approached quite often, and some people know me, or some people have seen me, and some people don't even know me. They'll just like, oh, someone else said you were make videos, so I'll come and take a picture with you. I always found that strange because if you watch the channel and you like it, great, and then we can have a conversation. If you've seen me before, that's cool too. But some people that don't even know my channel would just want a picture because it's a YouTuber. And it's funny because a lot of kids nowadays, back in the day, they used to want to play soccer. Now everyone wants to be a YouTuber or a TikToker. So when they meet someone, if a kid meets someone that's a YouTuber, you just became like you just have the coolest profession in the world. Like then you say how many followers you have, and the kid's like, his eyes change and he starts asking all these questions. He asks you if you know his favorite youth. Do you know this person or that person? Have you ever made a video with this person? So yeah, it's definitely cool. And it was the first time it happened, I was pretty shocked. And then it started happening pretty often. I got used to it. But then like when my parents visit, and even when I'm in New Jersey, there's a lot of Brazilians. So some people stop me in New Jersey and want a picture, and we walk in my dog with my dad, and I'll just be like shocked, like, why do they want a picture with you? Like, I don't get it. Like, what do you do down there? Because they don't understand the videos. But
It's so true too. When I make videos on the street, sometimes kids will run up and say, is this a YouTube channel? What's the
mm,
name? How many followers? And they get so excited. You can see the kids light up. Like it's just the funniest thing. And old people, because usually old people are just kind of wandering around with not much to do and they want to be
yeah,
involved in
it's
something.
different interests though. The older people are more like curious, or the younger people want to go right for how many followers you have. I want to see how important you are right away.
Exactly. It's a funny story of how like I've seen your channel for many, many years. And I was showing my boyfriend like the one about the 4 stages of relationship. My assistant sent it to me and I was like, I know this guy. he said, yeah, my mom is obsessed with this creator. She was talking the other day, she was talking all about his wife. And, she was really curious about his marriage and everything. So you're right. Moms do love you. And in general, I think Brazilians love you. I mean, you have a huge amount of followers, and Brazilians are very good followers. I feel like they're just like one of the best countries to make videos for. They're like eternally online. I mean, they love watching things, it feels like.
I think yeah, they definitely put the social into social media. So they want to comment. Like I I don't know when I started commenting on videos, but I used to watch videos, never think about commenting. But now that I receive so many comments, now I'm like, oh, I mean, this is social media. If I like a video, I'll leave a comment to be part of the conversation and keep the conversation going. So yeah, Brazilians are very intense in that respect. And they make a video that they like the video, they're going to tell you how much they like it. But also, if they dislike the video, they're definitely going to let you know. And a lot of people have it's such a big country. So if you say something that's from your perspective and your opinions, you're going to get some people. No, no, no. I live there. It's not like that. I'm not like that. So there's definitely some of that too. So, but they're definitely active and engaged. And like I'll be watching a video about something super random, and then I'll see some Brazilian comment on the video. Like the video's in English with no subtitles, but the personal comment in Portuguese. Like they're really everywhere and on every channel, and it's pretty impressive.
They're definitely going to flock to this podcast for
I
sure.
hope
Once they
so.
see your
Yeah,
face, they definitely will. No, I know for a fact they will. Tell me, do you feel like Brazil has changed you in some way?
sure. Yeah, I definitely become more outgoing. I would say like in general, my general like default setting would be to be more introverted, but that won't. It's not the best strategy in Brazil. You definitely want to be more outgoing, making friends, getting invited to barbecues, and you definitely want to be more outgoing. So I've kind of just learned how to deal with people and make conversations with strangers. Definitely easier in Brazil than the United States. So that's definitely helped me. So I've definitely become more outgoing, a little bit more kind of carefree. Like the situation is not perfect, but in Portuguese say, "Vamos dar um jeito." We're gonna make it work out. It's all gonna work out. So Brazilians, it's kind of strange. They kind of sometimes they have this fatalist attitude where like everything's bad, like nothing's gonna go right. But at the same time, they have like this other attitude where vai dar certo. A gente vai achar um jeito. We're gonna find a way to make it happen. So it's kind of strange how they balance those two kind of fatalist, everything's bad attitude and it's bad, but we're gonna make it work. So I think I've definitely found that vamos achar um jeito. Like let's figure it out. Let's even though the situation is a little challenging, you can when you live in another country by yourself, it definitely matures you, and you learn how to deal with different people and different situations, and you show up in a city and you have no friends, and it's your responsibility to make some friends. You can't rely on your friends from kindergarten. You have to go out there and make friends. So it's definitely a good experience. I would definitely recommend everyone spend 1 year abroad somewhere. Go there with just a backpack and try to make friends. Try to do it when you're young. If I were doing it again, I would have. I was working in New York until I was like 27, and then I should have just earlier figured out that I was never going to work a 9 to 5 desk job, and I should have just went to Brazil. I should have gone to Brazil at maybe 21. But I mean, everything worked out well. But I think if I was giving myself that advice, and then maybe to travel, like I still have never been to Asia. There's a lot of other countries that I would like to visit in like Thailand. So life goes by fast. So definitely travel as much when you're young, because a lot of people think, oh, I'm going to wait till I'm retired so I can travel, which is great. You should definitely do that as well. But it's definitely fun to also have those travel experiences when you're young and to kind of have more energy and a little bit more flexible. Like I slept in a lot of hostels and a lot of strange sleeping situations that nowadays I would not do. So, you're
100%
a
agree.
little more fearless when you're in your 20s.
I 100% agree. Always wonder. I mean, I guess if it's not a priority for people, great, but you're going to wait until you're in your 60s to go travel. I mean, that's not going to be the same as you traveling in your 20s. Nowadays, if someone's going to tell me go to a hostel and spend a month sleeping in a hostel, I'll be like, hell no. But I did that, and I did things that I would never do now, because I sleep worse. I'm a lot more sensitive to noise, to smells, to everything. But like when I was I even did it like I did it when I was even 30. I remember I spent 3 months just sleeping in hostels in Argentina, and I was fine. I didn't care that there were guys there. Like it doesn't matter. It didn't matter to me. But I wouldn't do that now. It's a completely different travel experience. And I 100% agree with you that going abroad and traveling, you get out of your comfort zone and you're forced to make connections. Otherwise, you're just going to end up wandering the city alone. You're forced to talk to people. And hostels are a very easy way to make connections.
And just another point to that, like something that's changed. You realize that every country has their own version of history. And they have their own way. They like maybe the same event is viewed much differently in Brazil than it was viewed in the United States and in Russia and China. So you kind of, I guess, have a little more. You're definitely more open-minded. You have a little more tolerance, and you kind of understand how countries and societies and historiographies are put together. Like they're kind of a lot of our reality is constructed. You know what we believe is important. Our holidays, our what's in our history textbooks, what's not in our history textbooks, which subjects are studied, what subjects are not studied. It's very interesting. And now I listen to tons of podcasts now that just tell the story of a random country. So I get basically their whole historiography, just so you can kind of okay, this is what they think about this situation. I think the United States, one of its huge weak points is because it's so big and it's kind of been important for so long that they really don't take much genuine interest in other cultures. And of course, that there are exceptions. And I try to be that. That's one of my motivating factors. Okay, I can't be that ugly, stupid American who doesn't know the capital of any country. But it's kind of we're kind of not taught those things. It's not really the average American's fault. We're not taught about any other cultures, and I think it's by design. They don't really want you asking too many questions, kicking under too many rocks. And all countries are like that. They leave out certain things that are not favorable to their history.
Yeah, I definitely am aware of like just the bad education that so many Americans get, and I guess you have a difference in terms of like where you are in the U.S. Obviously, people on the coast typically tend to be a little bit more like New York, it's on the water. Like you get California, like those places on the sides of the U.S. If that makes sense. Like it's when you go deep into the U.S., which is where the problems arise. But I've seen videos, and Omegle, one of my content creator friends, he asks Americans, obviously it's typical like what's a city in Europe? They're like, isn't Europe a city? Those things. But you also have a lot of Americans that are well educated, and I feel bad for those people because when they travel, they still get the stereotyped as the dumb American, and they have to lie and say they're Canadian. This whole deal. I think it's unfortunately a lot of Americans. I don't want to say most Americans are like that because I actually don't know. But there's a large
I would
percentage,
say that the
right?
majority, in a big country, sure, there's a lot of people that are pretty worldly, but the majority don't know much about outside of maybe the Caribbean. Maybe they visited some islands in the Caribbean, but they don't know too much about the rest of the world generally speaking.
And it's interesting because when we had the conversation earlier, you had said that Americans typically go to Rio. And I find that this is so true because whenever there's like a popular place, like even when I was in Mexico, all the Americans would go to Cancun. Now maybe Playa del Carmen as well. But it's only when you go to like other areas in Mexico that are not as well known that you start seeing French people and Israelis and like all these other cultures, specifically French people, because they love wandering off the beaten path. And those are the people that actually go deeper because, French, they're also a lot more they go deeper into things in general. They don't like to stay on the surface. They're a lot more about debating and, looking into the depth of a subject. And so it's interesting that it's like Americanized. The place becomes Americanized because all the Americans flock to the tried and true places, just like in Rio and, but not a lot of Americans would go to other places in Brazil, right? And so that's why you said in Sao Paulo, you just don't see a lot of Americans, I suppose.
Yeah, they definitely stay on the tried and true routes. Like I always tell my friends to come to Brazil, and it's just like it's just not on the agenda. Like, oh, Brazil, yeah, we never thought about that. Like it doesn't really come up. Even Rio, which does get a lot of American tourists, it's still compared to how many Americans visit Paris or Rome or even the beaches in Mexico. It's just there's not that many Americans down there. I don't know why. A lot of Americans don't even have their passport, so that's another issue. But yeah, Americans like French people. Yeah, I have a lot of French friends here. French people definitely like to get off the beaten path. They like to kind of discover, and they also a little more price conscious than Americans. Americans, I think the dollar's strong. They're not very price conscious. So even if it's the most over touristic place, they don't really care. They have 2 weeks of vacation, and that's the place they're going. Where French might take like a month and a half off work and kind of budget out the trip. So yeah, definitely something I would agree with.
Tim, now when we talk about Brazilians, inviting you to, barbecues and whatever, there's kind of a stereotype that I've heard that Brazilians, a lot of times they'll invite you to things or they'll make plans, but those plans don't come to fruition. Do you think there's truth to that, or have you had a really good experience making plans in Brazil?
I think there's a little bit of truth to that, but a lot the Brazilians like to have barbecues. So there's a pretty good chance if you're invited to a barbecue and they like you, it's going to happen. But I think Brazilians will say things just in general to be nice in the moment, like, "Oh, you got to come to my house and do this," and they might mean it in the moment, but they might not want to follow through. And Brazilians also have a very casual way of making plans. So things kind of happen organically and you can't expect too much scheduling. So sometimes you'll make a plan and plans change and people really don't want to offend you in Brazil. So they'll say yes even when they mean no to like to go to your party and then they'll think of a last minute excuse when there's like no time to change the plan. So yeah, I would say barbecues, I've definitely have a good record of being invited to barbecues and the barbecue actually happening, but it's definitely a stereotype, and there's definitely invites that have been made in the moment. Like, you got to come to my beach house, and they're not really expecting you to show up. And they also do that with food. Like, they offer you food, and like have a bite of their food, and they're also not expecting you to say yes. There's the little Brazilian cultural dances you have to learn about. Yeah. But I think if they like you and you're invited to a barbecue, you'll probably there'll probably will be a barbecue. Just bring some beers and have a good time.
Yeah, they're quite indirect in terms of communication, right? And I think it's that thing of like not wanting to offend. I've had this come up so much in conversation with Brazilians themselves, saying this is one aspect I don't like about our culture is that people say things just to say things because we don't want to be rude, and then they move somewhere like Germany, and then they're like, oh no, people don't do that here. They don't want to come. They just say no, and it's easier. But in that moment, I totally understand where they're coming from because I guess I live in Canada, maybe that's why. But in that moment, you don't want to hurt the person's feelings. And it's easier just to say, yeah, we'll see each other. Let's grab a coffee. Both of you know it's not going to happen. It's just you're saying this just so you can walk away and not feel kind of awkward about the interaction, I suppose.
Yeah, it's like that the Asian concept of saving face, where you get to save face. Like, both of you know it's a lie, but at least you get to pretend that it was a genuine offer and I genuinely accepted the offer. That happens a lot.
Tim, going forward, like, do you see yourself staying in Brazil? Do you see yourself moving to the US? Have you talked about it with your wife? Is,
Yeah,
is she hearing about it for the first time now?
no, we've talked about. It's kind of challenging because there's 3 places, like, first, she has an Italian passport, so we can go to Europe if we want. I'm not really, into going to Europe right now. I think I would go there if I was, like, in my 60s because it's a slower pace of life. I would either be in Brazil or the United States. They both have their benefits. Right now, we're at the beach, in the Litoral Norte, which is kind of in between Rio and São Paulo. It's beautiful. So yeah, I could see myself living at the beach. I could see myself staying in São Paulo, or if I had like a cool project or job opportunity, I would go to New York as well because I think it would be cool for her to experience. I mean, I've experienced Brazil, but I mean, she's visited New York, but she's never experienced living in New York. So it'd be kind of cool to share that experience. It's just really expensive, so I wouldn't be able to just work on YouTube and rent an apartment in New York. I would have to figure something else out. Where here in Brazil, I can keep my lifestyle going with my YouTube and my language courses. So that'll be challenging in New York. So it's something we thought about, but we haven't decided yet. For now, we're in São Paulo.
Tim, thank you so much for taking part in this podcast. I think a lot of people are going to be so excited to see your face. They'll be like, I can't believe you did this collaboration. I have so many Brazilian followers. Obviously, you have a ton more. But I think in general, for many people that are not even Brazilians, anybody else is going to be an interesting conversation. Thank you so much. And obviously, I'm going to link all your socials. But is there anything else you want people to know? You obviously have language courses. Where can they check them out?
Sure. Actually, I'm also starting a channel in English where I kind of talk about Brazil because a lot of people want to know about Brazil. Just under my name, Tim Cunningham, I could send you the link, and I think a lot of people know my Brazilian channels, but I think it'd be cool to be able, not just about Brazil, to also talk about the United States, and it's kind of like a therapy for me as well because I've been doing so much stuff in Portuguese. It's feels like this was fun. It feels nice to speak in English and express my opinions in my native language, and when I'm in Brazil, even though I've been here for so long, I still feel like a guest. I always feel you're always going to feel a little like a guest, and when you're using their language, you feel like you're using someone else's language. But when I feel a little more confident in saying my true opinions in Brazil without having to ruffle any feathers in English, I should say. So yeah, that's one of my projects. I teach English as well, but if they understood this podcast without subtitles, I don't know if they need they need my class. But usually I usually focus on the beginners, and then we do have some advanced classes more focused on accent and conversation. But yeah, it also was a pleasure for me. It was really fun, and I think it's really cool what you're doing on your channel and your podcast and showing these cultural differences.
Thank you so much, Tim. Thank you. I feel so great. I always love getting compliments. All right, Tim. Thank you guys. And thank you guys all for watching. Let us know what you thought about the episode. Leave us your comments below, either on Spotify or YouTube or Apple or wherever you're listening or watching. Thanks, Tim.